Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I should like to start by extending our deep gratitude to Mr. Moses Konstantinis, President of the Central Board of the Jewish Communities in Greece and the Jewish Community of Rodas, for having invited me and my son to attend and to address this special ceremony to honor my late father, the Consul of Turkey to Rhodes during the German occupation in the Second World War. I should also like to thank His Excellency Ambassador Oğuz Çelikol, the Turkish ambassador to Greece, and His Excellency Mr. İhsan Yücel, the Turkish consul to Rhodes. Friends, according to Genesis, Cain and Abel were the first and second sons of Abraham and Eve, born after the fall of man. The fall of man, or simply the fall, it refers to the transition of the first humans from a state of innocent obedience to God to a state of guilty disobedience to God. Their story is told in all the major religions of the world, whether it be Torah, the Bible, or the Quran. In all the versions, Cain, a farmer, commits the first murder by killing his own brother Abel, who was a shepherd. And he killed him because God rejected Cain's sacrifice but accepted Abel's. And the Lord asked, "Where is thy brother?" And Cain answered, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? Am I my brother's keeper?" This is a question that has plagued humanity since the beginning of time. Yet, perhaps there was no greater moment in history to ask and answer that question than during World War II, when, in a quest for religious and racial purity, more than 6 million Jews and others were sent to their deaths. Men, women, children, young and old, murdered simply because of their faith and their ethnicity. The river of death destroyed homes, villages, and nations, yet much of mankind simply stood by and watched these suffering people being swallowed up by the waters of hatred and cruelty. My father Selahatin Ulkumen and my mother Miri Nisa were witnesses to part of this great tragedy unfolding before their very eyes on the island of Rodas. This was year 1943. They saw the betrayal of God, the treachery of man, and the fall of humanity. They also saw how man could kill his neighbor simply because he was different. They realized how it was possible for people to close their eyes to the truth because of their own hatred, cowardice, or simply indifference. My father and my mother could not simply stand by and watch. They did not close their eyes, nor did they acquiesce in the hatred or indifference which existed. Instead, with my mother's support, my father stood up, not as a hero, not as a diplomat, not as a Muslim, nor a Turk, but rather as a man answering God's call to protect his brother, a call that would later claim the life of his dearest person to him, my beloved mother. I was, of course, deeply marked by my father's decision, both as a child and as a young adult. I believe that the choice which my father made at great risk to himself, his family, and his future career was the right choice, and ultimately, as we shall see, led to the loss of my mother, barely 28 years old at the time, and also to that of my grandmother, the two women who would otherwise have been an indispensable part of my life. With time, these feelings of deep loss were attenuated, not because I had grown older and grayer, but because I realized with growing certainty that my father could not have taken any other decision. For him, it was not just the right thing, but the only possible thing he could do. He always used to say, "We Muslims are like Jews. We share the same Father and the same God. We also share the same belief, which, as we know, is deeply rooted in Jewish teaching, that he who saves a single life saves a whole world." And it was this belief that compelled my father to save scores of Jews in Rodas during World War II. On this island, there was a Kahal Kodosh holy community which had existed since 1492, when the Jews were expelled from Spain. Rhodes was part of the Ottoman Empire until 1912, when it was taken over by Italy. In 1940, the Germans were allowed by their allies, the Italians, to use the island as a southern base of operations for their killing machine. Hitler's final solution did not exclude any of the islands in the Aegean. In 1943, my father was assigned to Rhodes as the Turkish Consul General. At that time, he was 30 years old. 1 year later, in July 1944, the Gestapo ordered the island's entire Jewish population, some 2,000 people, to gather at their headquarters to register for what was termed temporary transportation, but what was, in reality, and everyone knew this, the gas chambers of Auschwitz. Gestapo men were sent back to the Jewish homes to make sure that the women and children had not failed to bring all their jewelry and money. The entire kahal, except those who could be saved, were later loaded onto wooden boxcars and deported by trains to the death camps in Poland. On the long journey, these people were beaten severely, ill-treated, and many of them died of thirst, starvation, and exhaustion. Before the deportations, my father went to the German commander of the island of Rodas, Ulrich von Klemen, and reminded him that Turkey was neutral in the war, and asked him to release those Jews who were Turkish nationals, and also, for reasons of humanity, their spouses, children, and close relatives, some of whom were Italian or Greek citizens, but nevertheless formed part of the family unit. The ruthless German general at first refused, stating that under Nazi law, all Jews were Jews and had to go to the concentration camps. My father replied that in Turkey, all persons were equal under the law and God, whether Jews, Muslims, or Christians, and that if he deported these Jews, this could have international consequences by compromising Turkey's neutrality in the war. After considerable persuasion, the German commander reluctantly agreed to exempt these categories of Jews from deportation, and my father arranged for them to be moved to Turkey in fishing boats, as was mentioned earlier, kayıks, at his own expense. As regards those who remained, they were still subjected to harsh treatment by the Nazis, and my parents continued to provide many of them with moral and humanitarian support, and even tried to prevent their deportation. In spite of these efforts, they were ultimately sent to the extermination camps. By late 1944, Turkey had decided to join the Allied powers, and as retaliation for having saved and helped the Jews on the island of Rodos, 2 Luftwaffe planes bombed the Turkish consulate in Rhodes, severely wounding my mother, as well as killing 2 other employees. My mother, who was then pregnant with me, later on died after having given birth. And when she died, I was 1 week old. My father was then deported by the Germans to Piraeus, on the occupied mainland of Greece. He spent the remainder of the war in detention. On learning the news of her daughter's death, my grandmother went into a state of shock and shortly thereafter shot herself. During the next 6 months, the Jewish Turks who remained on Rhodes were subjected to constant harassment and ill treatment by the Gestapo, but were not deported, presumably because of the disorder which had by then prevailed throughout the Third Reich during the last days of the war. Friends, my father's work has been remembered and honored on numerous occasions worldwide, including the award of the distinguished title of Hasid Umot Halom, Righteous Gentile by Yad Vashem. Yet, for my father, it was not these accolades or awards that gave him inner comfort, but rather the courage he had found to do what he felt was right, having answered a compelling call at the time when his brother needed him most. He was his brother's keeper. As I look into this audience, some Jews, some Muslims, Christians, or others, when I relate my parents' story, I am both awed and inspired. What we have here is a strong answer to what is unfortunately happening only too frequently at the present time. Today, as war, hatred, and religious fundamentalism of all kinds envelope the world, the call for mankind to defend its fellow man becomes louder and stronger. Within this chaotic and often soulless world, there are still many who share the same values of peace, brotherhood, and humanity. And it is our task, yours and mine, to ensure that their voices are heard and fully understood by the silent majority and are not stifled by those who preach hatred and intolerance. May I leave you with one closing thought. We should not limit ourselves to honoring the memory of those persons of whom there are unfortunately not many. As you know, only 29 diplomats worldwide has been recognized by Yad Vashem. But these people acted on their own initiative to come to the help and the rescue of those in mortal danger and distress. we should continue to promote the general conviction that humanity and justice are above religion, color, or gender. This conviction should simply flow from a universal recognition of man's inalienable right to live, not only in peace and harmony, but simply to live. Because in the end, are we not all, each and every one of us, our brother's keeper? Thank you.